Hello and welcome to Gardening Australia. I'm here at Mount Costa, savouring some of the best horticulture beautiful Brisbane has to offer. But it's not the only treasure on this week's show. We've got plenty of jewels coming your way. Here's what's in store.
I'm in my happy place, a garden I could get lost in whilst discovering all of its hidden delights.
Spring is such an exciting time of the year. There's so many flowers, lots of fragrance and, of course, food to harvest. But it's also a great time to get planting. And I'm going to show you what to get in the ground now for the weeks, months and year ahead.
I'm going to show you a new development in the fight against the most notorious Queenslander of all time, the cane toad.
This garden is a treasure trove of rare and unusual plants, from beautiful flowering bulbs to tiny alpines and heat-loving perennials. It's a garden that I can't wait to show you.
I'm in Kedron, one of Brisbane's northern suburbs, and it's home to Mount Alvernia College, a Catholic secondary girls' school founded in 1956. 950 students turn up each day to hit the books here. This school has put the garden front and centre. Where did the garden begin?
Began in 2014 as part of an overall refurbishment of the college. We were really looking to ensure that we had a beautiful garden, La Foresta, that really reflected our Franciscan heritage.
Sam Jensen has been the school principal here since 2021. So what are the main elements here of the garden and its design?
It is a place of learning. It's a place of atmosphere, reflection. It's productive. We have 20 garden beds which deliver us delicious fruit and vegetables, including tropical fruit, because we are in Queensland.
And how's it engaging with the students and the staff?
The students come here to use it for science lessons, for art lessons. It's a place for staff to escape their marking. And it really is serving our community beautifully.
Surrounded on three sides by the school's buildings, the architecture complements the garden. Curved archways, limed-washed walls, sandstone paths and olive groves feel more like you're in a Tuscan monastery than suburban Brisbane. What was your initial outlook for the garden?
I really decided then and there that we didn't need a college gardener, we needed a curator of gardens.
Garden curator David Pratt landed that role in 2022. What does your role entail here in the garden?
Look, it goes all the way from the most basics of gardening through to communication, engagement with the students, and essentially managing the biggest classroom in the school. Any one time, there might be 2, 3, 4, 5 classes, all doing disparate activities. There might be art classes, hospitality classes, science classes, all interacting with the garden, learning, enjoying.
What are you actually growing in the garden?
Good old basil, parsley, dill, coriander, spring onions, tomatoes, all the peas, beans as well, and citrus. Lots of citrus, lots of cauliflower. We've got broccoli. We've got some lovely cabbages coming on as well. We're sticking to a lot of staples. Kids are familiar with them. We want them to engage with them easily. They get used all the time, whether it be in like a China our cafe or with the food tech rooms. And some cauliflower for you, some tomatoes underneath.
Thank you.
So how do you go about engaging the girls with the garden space?
It's their garden and they take ownership.
Students can participate in everything from plant propagation to planting out the garden and daily maintenance with David. What are some of the jobs that you do when you come out?
We like helping with the chickens and planting different plants.
Are there any jobs that you maybe don't like doing, or is it pretty...
Going near the chickens. Not a chicken person.
Who looks after the chooks?
Dave.
Dave.
And
Johannes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
How important are the chickens in the garden community?
They're the most important ambassadors to our garden. They're a really integral part of our composting cycle, our waste management cycle. The kids are down here all the time, cuddling the chooks, learning what it's like to have a chicken and understanding their nuances and likes and dislikes.
Classes in hospitality and food tech take a deeper level of interaction with the garden. Food tech students source produce, then design their menus around what's available. What are some of the main things you like using from the garden?
The lemons, definitely. Yeah, they're good, really good seasonal-wise. So
What's the garden taught you?
It's taught me how to be calm in a situation, and sometimes, like, if I'm anxious, I will, like, pretend the garden's around me and stuff. You know, it's, like, just nice to have that, like, centre in the school.
This is the lungs of the school. It's where people come to breathe because they're a bit overwhelmed, a bit anxious. They need to retreat and re-engage.
Sometimes you just need to unwind a little bit and just come out here and take a break.
I wonder if you can give it a little head massage, it'll like fall asleep on there. Oh, I'm sorry. I think it's just good to get out of the classroom setting, just enjoy a bit of sun and actually focus in a different environment.
The school also runs a community giveaway program called Grow It Forward.
Yeah, certainly. They're a gift from the garden. We'll grow it forward.
Veggie seedlings and produce grown in the garden are given away by the students out the front of the school.
Hi girls, do you want anything from Grow It Forward?
And it's an opportunity for us to share with our community the wonderful produce that comes from the garden. Schools are faced with lots of choices about what to spend the precious money on. So it was a choice to invest in a beautiful space like this, which operates both educationally as an outdoor learning classroom, but similarly as a place of well-being and contemplation and really, good mental health.
School is like a second home to me, and I think the garden, it's the first thing you see when you walk into the gates. You know, everyone feels a sense of home, and they love Mount A so much because of the garden and because of how it makes you feel.
Is it dangerous to eat apple seeds? Apples, hawthorns and other fruit seeds contain amygdalin, a compound made of cyanide and sugar, which is turned into cyanide when chewed and ingested. But don't worry, you'd have to eat around 150 to a few thousand of them all crushed up very thoroughly and ingested to have any adverse effects.
What is plant blindness? Plant blindness is a term used to describe some people who overlook or underappreciate the plants in their environment. This term was coined by botanists in 1998, and it's used to describe how some people will suddenly notice animals or other features of the environment at the expense of plants. Plant blindness can have consequences for plant conservation because some people underestimate the value of plants in the ecosystem and in our world.
What is a lignituber? Some Australian native plants in bushfire-prone areas have a lignituber or woody swelling at or below ground level, enabling them to survive bushfires. They can do this because lignitubers contain regenerative buds that can develop completely new plant stems if the plant is destroyed by fire. Lignitubers are found in some eucalypts, banksias, waratahs, and even some Lomatia species. Rainforest plants usually lack lignitubers as bushfires are rare or absent from this habitat.
Josh is bringing us a slice of the Australian dream this week, visiting an eclectic and deeply personal garden that someone has spent a lifetime building and experimenting in. Prepare yourself for a visual treat.
If you spend a lifetime in the garden, the link between you and it takes on a tangible, almost literal quality. Jenny Behan moved on to a bush block in the Perth Hills in the early 1970s. After 50 years, her story and the story of her garden have become intertwined. I can't wait to hear it. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Josh. Do come in.
Wow, what a wonderful garden.
It's a linear acre and it backs onto 200 hectares of water catchment land. There's no sort of steep, obvious shape to the land, but when you start gardening it, you realise it's on different levels and it is actually sloped. It's a combination of laterite and loam. One gardens more with a mattock than a spade, but it's also rich soil. This is where I've replanted all the native grasses.
Jenny is not underselling the challenge of gardening in Perth's hills. We're heading into summer and it gets oppressively hot up here, well away from the cooling sea breezes along the coast. Yet she has created a garden full of colour and joy, using the dimensions of the property to offer up long, winding paths with treasures waiting to be discovered as you round the next curve. Lee's doing well.
I know, too well.
Jenny, this is a garden that revels in the art of the reveal. Clearly this is by design.
It is. When I contemplated how one would approach a whole acre, I realised you had to create sort of moments here and there, and the circle was a natural sort of organic shape that works with the canopy of the eucalypts and the acacias. They create boundaries from which you garden inwards or outwards, depending which circle we're standing in this garden. That was the intention. I'm interested in art and architecture. Those sorts of things matter to me.
Judging from these plantings, this is still quite a young project?
It is. This was our little pandemic project. The street was quite involved. Everybody got very excited when the Corten steel ring went in, and even more exciting for me is when the sculpture went in. And I think it works so beautifully with the environment. I've turning the Haecularines into weeping trees just to keep this little secret enclave because we don't want everybody knowing it's here, but people in the street now come in and when they've been for a walk, sit here and enjoy it.
It feels like we've entered an inner sanctum.
You have. This is the little pulse and heart of the place that connects the veranda to the studio and to the garden. The wall just creates a lovely enclave here. It's cooling and it's a contrast to the kumquats. On this side is the studio with my little more European experience of the Pierre de Ronsard and the mini chrysanthemums and the Felicias, and it leads on to the cottage garden down beyond the studio.
It's beautiful.
They could have popped for us, couldn't it?
Almost. It'll be tomorrow.
If I could, I would have only these. These are water temple bowls from Myanmar, and I'm interested in notions of tranquility and serenity. Temple bowls are very much part of that whole way of thinking, and they're beautiful to design around. It changes it from a space to a place, a moment that you want to go towards and experience and be part of.
How does the process of design add to the serenity that some might say would already exist in a bush block?
Creating moments in a massive planting gives you the opportunity to pause and reflect. The combination of texture and object, I think, are very important. If you were just looking at it at one huge expanse of planting, it wouldn't draw the eye as this does. And that's very much an essence of a beautiful garden, I think. I see the garden as one's largest composition. It's no different from composing a painting, really. You think about line, shape, form, texture, colour palette. They're all almost the same tools in the same toolkit.
What attracted you to this property to begin with?
The fact that it was a natural bush block. I grew up in the wheat belt and my father was a passionate ornithologist and native plant lover, and he devoted a lot of his life to trying to save species and propagate them. So there was a sort of a natural inclination to live in this beautiful Australian bush.
This part of the property is much less formal in terms of design. What's been your approach?
I really wanted it to merge in a certain sort of way with the borrowed landscape. So one didn't want to have such an organised garden here, but the Westringias are really the thing that give it sort of shape and contrast, and clipping some things for form helps hugely, I think, for the eye to sort of travel past and beyond and take in the contrast of the completely natural areas.
What would you say to people who feel perhaps that Australian landscapes and exotic plants can't coexist?
I'd say nonsense. You definitely can. You can throw them together, and the only thing is one has to be very careful with the soil, you know. So we use native soil almost exclusively.
Maintaining an acre of gardens is a lot of work. Who helps with the garden upkeep?
Well, my beloved Richard does, and we have a wonderful person who comes in who's a very skilled gardener himself, Harry. The three of us spend Saturday morning in the garden together, and Harry's very good on understanding design issues like the volume of a rock and how that will work better in one space and not another. And it's lovely to be able to discuss those things and do it collaboratively instead of you just being the only one. It's very much an eclectic garden. It's creating an environment of enclaves and special moments underneath the canopy of the eucalypts. That's really, I think, what I've been doing.
With spring finally here, it's a perfect time to get out into the garden. Millie is on the tools with a plan for the productive months ahead.
Is such an incredibly exciting time of the year, particularly in a cool, temperate climate like this. Everything wakes up, there's blooms everywhere, lots of beautiful fragrance, and of course, lots of things to harvest to eat. But it's also a really great time to get planting for the weeks, the months, and the year ahead. One of the groups of crops that I find so satisfying to grow at this time of the year are the root crops, things like carrots and parsnips, and of course my absolute favourite, beetroot. And the first thing I need to do to get them in the ground is prepare the bed. Preparing a bed for root crops is easy. You just aerate with a fork to make sure the soil's nice and loose. And then I add a light sprinkling of homemade compost. You don't need loads of manure or fertiliser because that would encourage leaves, and I want to encourage the roots. And when it comes to my root crops, I wait for the week that says it's time to sow. For me, that is warming soil, but some nice, mild, moist weather that means those little seed are going to rip away. One of my absolute favourite crops is beetroot. I love to eat it cooked or raw. In summer, thinly sliced beetroot salad, it's a favourite. And I grow lots of different varieties, but my best are chioggia, which is a little candy stripe pink, and it is the sweetest to eat raw. Now, it's a really simple thing to do. I usually use a board, it's like preparing for paving, nice and flat, and then I just run that across the bed to get a nice straight line. And I've got my seed here, and by soaking them overnight, they're going to get out of the ground much more quickly. I just sprinkle them in that rill. I try and get a bit of spacing on them, say 2 or 3 centimetres, but I'm not too worried about that because as they germinate, I can thin them out and then just gently cover that over with the board. That'll give me a reasonable spacing and I'll start again. Another fantastic root crop to sow right now are the carrots, and they are quite a fiddly little seed to sow. Now, carrot seed are tiny and they're impossible to sow into a rill, so I use a little trick. I mix that tiny seed with some fine soil. I can then sow that mix, and that is spacing and sowing the seed. This is a variety called Little Fingers. Water the seed in really gently to make sure you don't displace them. Consistency of moisture is key to germination over the next couple of weeks. So to aid that, I cover with a piece of fabric. You can use some hessian or an old blanket, but this is an old lace curtain from the op shop. The fabric really does reduce your need to water, but you still need to keep it moist. And then check in about a week, once those seeds start to germinate, lift it off. This technique gives you great germination for a lot less effort. I always try to have more seedlings on the go than the garden can handle. And that means wherever there's space, I can fill it with something to eat. While I'm always sowing for spring success, I'm also preparing to fail. So when I get a failed sowing, well, I've always got something to fill that gap. In this case, silver beet. It is such a rewarding crop. It's fast growing and it can go in anywhere, anytime. And me and the chickens, well, we both love it. Here you go, girls. Pop, 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 pop. Another really important job to do right now is to check your fruit trees, and you need to actually at times thin them. This is a plum, it's Louisa, and she is a chronic oversharer. She produces this huge glut of fruit, usually more every second year. So to try and even that fruiting out from year to year, and also to get her to produce larger fruit, but a few less of them, you literally thin it out. And you can be quite rough and just sort of work your way around and reduce some of the numbers of fruit in each of these clusters. By thinning, you're winning. I'm also going to thin the fruit on the quince tree. It's a variety known as pineapple, which gives you a clue to how big these fruit can get. I'm going to remove those that are on the tips of branches so they don't weigh them down and break them. While it's the perfect time to plant some things outdoors, for other crops, the nights and the soil are still too cold here in central Victoria. So things like tomatoes I actually raise to quite an advanced size in a container before they go into the ground. These are reasonably advanced, but you can see they're quite floppy, and if I potted them there, they're just going to blow around. But they will form roots all the way up that stem. So I'm just going to remove what were the original seed leaves. You can go quite a long way and then just carefully tip it out. And then that whole plant can go right to the bottom of that pot. Then I just backfill the whole way up. You can see how much that's stabilised that little plant. In 3 or 4 weeks, when the soil's warm enough, they can get out there and they will absolutely fire away when they hit the dirt. Anytime you spend in the garden, you're never going to regret it, but right now it is so rewarding. The work you do this weekend, well, you'll watch it grow in front of your very eyes, and you'll be harvesting those rewards for months to come. Have a beautiful time in your garden.
Still to come on Gardening Australia, Hannah makes room for some native plants in her garden. Tammy has a great idea to brighten up any table, inside or out. And Jane uncovers a treasure chest of rare plants. There are few things more annoying than an unwanted guest in your garden, particularly one that comes at the expense of our native wildlife. Cane toads are a wicked problem that the country's struggled with for decades. But now some canny Queenslanders have come up with a plan of attack for home gardeners to lead the pushback. Here's Jerry with the details.
Cane toads, yuck. In 1935, the Queensland government infamously introduced the South American cane toad to control cane beetles. The unscientific release failed, and the rest is history. The toads spread around Australia, poisoning and killing anything that consumes them, eating small reptiles, insects and other amphibians, and displacing and outcompeting native species for food and resources. They've gone down in the history books as one of the worst invasive species in the world, and Australia has been largely powerless to stop their rapid march across the continent. They've radiated outwards and are now regularly found in Kakadu and the Kimberley. Toads can get to 2.5 kilos. They're now a common sight across Brisbane and they regularly appear in my garden. Someone who knows this blight better than most is Nikki Tomsett, the invasive species project officer for Queensland-based non-profit environmental charity Watergum. So amongst the invasive species in Australia, how do you rank the cane toad?
The cane toad is definitely the worst. So they have an estimated population of about 2 billion cane toads and an ever-expanding range across Australia. They can breed twice a year and produce up to 35,000 eggs each time.
So how harmful are they to the environment?
They're toxic. They'll eat pretty much anything that they'll fit their mouth around. So they can cause declines in native populations of wildlife. They can poison your pets, and they can also impact agriculture.
A new trap and lure system has been developed, and Nikki and her team are calling on home gardeners to get on board and push back these interlopers.
The trap hinges on a charming quirk of cane toad tadpoles in Australia, where they'll actually seek out other cane toad eggs and cannibalise them.
Because of this behaviour, researchers at the University of Queensland were able to create a lure that releases a chemical compound into the water that smells like cane toad eggs.
The cane toad tadpoles will then find and follow into the trap, thinking that they're about to get their next meal. And native frog tadpoles just are simply not attracted to it.
So how big a body of water would you need to have? Would it have to be this size, for example?
No, so this beautiful pond is a great example, but you can use it in water fountains, you can use it in dams or smaller creeks, as long as it's about 15 centimetres deep and has cane toad tadpoles.
UQ awarded the licence for the technology to the non-profit Nikki works for, who called upon their extensive network of community volunteer toadbusters.
We have an engaged community of over 3,000 toadbusters in Australia, and they trialled the trap for us. So originally, we ran a citizen science test, and people were out in the community testing the lures and handmade traps. And over years and years of experimentation, we finally designed the perfect trap.
The first step is to establish that you have cane toad tadpoles and not some other sort of frog.
These guys here are definitely cane toad tadpoles. They're jet black, they've got a clear tail frill and a diamond-shaped body, so that's that bony eye ridge starting to form. And in terms of behaviour, you can see they're all swarming together in the shallows, and they don't really come up to breathe like native tadpoles do.
Now we have a confirmed cane toad tadpole infestation. What happens next?
Well, you're ready to get trapping, so you can grab your trap. It does need a weight in it, so I like to put a rock in to weigh it down, and then pop your lid on, twist anti-clockwise, and then you can put your trap into the water. So you want to set it nice and close to the cane toad tadpoles and just hold it down until the water fills to that optimum water level line. Certainly helps. You want the trap to stay nice and still so that it doesn't disrupt that scent plume from the lure. There. So once your trap is stable and submerged and all the water is settled, you're ready to set it with a lure. You just need one. And you just pop the lure into the hole here on side A.
Now, once those tadpoles go in, there's no way they can get back out.
No, the funnel's are specially designed and they just never seem to find their way out again.
Nikki's tips for a successful trapping session include doing this on a sunny day when the tadpoles are more active and avoiding rainy days, as the extra water will dilute the strength of the lure's scent plume.
So we recommend leaving the traps for 4 to 8 hours. And we've got a few tadpoles in here, which is great for how long it was in. So open up the lid, remove our rock out. It's really important to check and see if you have any bycatch. We might get a couple of little fish, put them back in the river. In this case, we don't. It's just cane-toed tadpoles. So you get your net and carefully pour out your tadpoles. There's actually some really big ones in there too.
It's pretty impressive.
It's very satisfying watching them all pour out. Try and get every last one. There's your lure. There we go. We'll take our lure out. And it's important to wash your trap really well before you reuse it the next time. The cane-toed tadpole swarms don't like the smell of each other, so if you don't wash your trap, the tadpoles might not go in it the next time. And then, with our lovely catch of cane-toed tadpoles here, we can put it into a container with some water and they're ready to be euthanized. You know, it's not their fault they're here, so you want to make sure to do it humanely. And the best method at the minute is stepped hypothermia. So that's popping them in a container with some water and putting them in the fridge for 8 hours for tadpoles, and then moving them into the freezer for 8 hours.
This new trap offers a glimmer of hope for gardeners to take back their backyards from being breeding farms for this most notorious of pests. For more information, visit the Gardening Australia website.
You'd have to persist throughout a couple of breeding seasons, but eventually you will start to notice a decrease in your cane-toad numbers.
Well, I can't wait to see how successful this program is as it's rolled out across the country.
We're excited too, Jerry. We can't wait to see the public take up this new technology and have a real impact on cane-toad numbers in Australia.
We can't all plant large trees in our garden, so why not choose some compact native shrubs? They're highly adaptable to a range of soil conditions, attract a large array of birds and bees, and I've been weaving a variety of them into my garden. They don't just look good, they also provide habitat, shade, windbreaks, and are easy to manage. We've got a number of relatively small yet steep banks in our garden, and we've used plants to stabilise them, including a range of compact natives. Over here we've got the native Hardenbergia. Now it's often used as a climber, but you can also grow it as a shrubby ground cover. And when it does that, it can help suppress the weeds. It can also attract beneficial pollinators to the garden. And below the ground, the roots are actually helping to fix nitrogen into the soil. All these different functions can benefit other plants, including the nearby apple tree. Now further down the garden, we've got the native myrtle wattle. And this one can grow to around 1 metre or 1.5 metres, depending on the conditions of the soil and how much water it's getting. But it's an absolute beauty, and just like the Hardenbergia, when it flowers, it's bringing in pollinators, and also below the ground, its roots love to help fix nitrogen into the soil, again, improving the overall soil health for all plants around it. Next up, the native indigo. Now, this one can actually grow quite large, but I prune it very tight to fit into this space because I don't want it to take over. When it does flower, those pinky purple blossoms bring in the pollinators, and again, like the other two, beneath the ground, the roots are also helping to fix nitrogen. All up, All these natives I've mentioned can thrive in pretty marginal soils. Here I've got compacted, heavy clay soils, and they're planted on a steep north-facing bank where it dries out pretty quick. So they're really fantastic in marginal conditions. Of course, they love lots of water in the beautiful soils if they can get it, but they don't need it. And that's what I'm interested in. Plants that produce all these functions, providing maximum yield in all these ways, but for minimal input. Now, I know I've been banging on about compact natives, but here's an example of something a bit different. It's actually the native hotbush, and it can grow into a medium or large tree. But if you want to, you can shape and sculpt those larger trees into compact shrubs. I've used my electric hedge trimmer, and I've basically box hedged it to create a massive windbreak and also a privacy screen from the car park. It works a treat and is a fantastic reminder that when you choose to, you can actually make plants do what you want. On this site, I'm always looking for ways to buffer our strong winds, even on a small scale. Here, I've got a young native mint bush, and it's going to grow around 2 metres tall, but you can prune it tighter as well. I'm planting it right next door to my vegetable garden because the winds rip around our house and smash any veggies trying to grow in this garden. So within a few years, this will be up and out, and a beautiful permanent feature with gorgeous purple flowers that brings in all the pollinators, but more importantly for this context, protects my veggies. No matter how small your garden is, there is always space for some compact native shrubs, whether that's in a garden pot, down the side of your driveway, or even right next door to your veggie garden.
We've done our fair share of scaping over the years here on Gardening Australia. Landscaping, hardscaping, softscaping, foodscaping, aquascaping, dryscaping. I've heard that manscaping is a thing, doesn't really interest me, but Tammy's doing something that just might. Tablescaping.
Probably the most versatile and forgiving plants growing around would have to be succulents. So many of them will tolerate periods of low light and lack of water and are indestructible. Perfect for creative DIY projects. A mixed bunch of succulents can be turned into something personal and playful. There's so much you can do with succulents, and I've got a little idea for a succulent table centerpiece. This is an ideal project for a birthday or celebration. But even if you don't have a special event coming up on the calendar, this succulent table centerpiece will spruce up any indoor space at any time of the year. I'm choosing a variety of potted succulents, but you could also take cuttings from your garden to insert into the arrangement.
Think about the composition. The centerpiece will look great with interesting shapes and contrasting textures. And when it comes to colour, choose whatever you're drawn to. I've gone with the harmonious greens and blues, and for a pop of contrast, the pinkish tones in these ones. You can use anything as a vessel for your plants, whatever takes your fancy. I like this simple, modern enamel baking tray. Whatever you go with, succulents need a minimum depth of 5 centimetres of soil to allow the roots to continue to grow. But there's no need for drainage holes, as I'm not going to be watering, misting or feeding this centerpiece whilst it's indoors. Succulent plants last for at least 2 months inside in these conditions. And after that time, I'm going to deconstruct it and put it in pots outside, but I can also gift pieces to friends. This is the fun part, arranging all the succulents. The tall ones I'll put towards the back, and then I think it's gonna have some sort of scene where there's a gradual fall and spilling over. I think I'll have the string of pearls just spilling over the side.
something like that. Now, there's a lot of pinks happening through here. So I think these little blue-green ones will contrast well by just popping them in here. I think that's looking pretty good. Now it's time to pot them up. As I go, I'm backfilling with succulent potting mix. Creating like a little forest with these chalk sticks. And it's always a good idea to sort of step back and assess where you've put things because it looks different from different angles. This one's Kalanchoe areophylla, snow white panda. For the corner spot, I've got these great little Sempervivum arachnoideum, adorned with cobweb-type hair. I've also got a variety of Echeveria cultivars, like this Echeveria snow angel. By mass planting all these individual rosette shapes, together they form an eye-catching design. And now I'm finishing the look by filling in any gaps with fine gravel. Great, I think it's ready to be served.
I love seeing the home gardens of people who explore the unusual and exotic in the world of plants. Those rare treasures that you can't just walk into a nursery and buy. They're uncovered after years of careful hunting and collecting. Jane's discovered a beautiful example in the northeast of Melbourne.
This terraced garden has been lovingly crafted to make it a perfect home for an impressive collection of rare and unusual plants. Everything wraps seamlessly around an 860 square metre block that's nestled in Eltham, in Melbourne's northeastern suburbs. The creative gardener behind it all is Gilles Lardy.
The goal for the front yard was to have a garden that we can look at from the house, but also that our neighbours and passers-by can enjoy. All these plants are very tough, so it's also not that difficult to manage. The backbone is grasses that bring like year-round interest. I have two kinds of grasses, the pheasant grass from New Zealand, and then I have the Stipa gigantea, which is a grass that sends out huge flowers during summer that can reach about 2 meter height.
And there's sort of movement in the garden then, isn't there, when you've got the grasses?
Yeah.
In amongst the mounds, you've got little things that seem to be popping up.
Trying to get interest throughout most of the 4 seasons. So to get that, I rely a lot on bulbs. It's like the anemones that you can see popping a bit everywhere.
Now, what about the euphorbias?
So euphorbias are really good for Australian gardens. They're very drought tolerant and they really look good for most of the year. Cushiony shape, evergreen foliage.
Long flowering.
Long flowering, and they have this kind of lime green color that I think is just wonderful. I have 3 different kinds of euphorbias here in the front yard. There's the Euphorbia rigida, which is bluish, grayish color.
Just a low-growing one.
Low-growing one, and at the moment it's flowering. And then I have the darker one, which is a different cultivar that also has a mound shape and just about the same height and flowers at the same time. A third one, which is much smaller in size, same bluish color, but tends to be more discreet and act more as a ground cover.
Now, as long as you give them a haircut when they've finished flowering, they don't self-seed everywhere?
Yeah, you have to be a bit careful. They will self-seed, but not that heavily. I mean, the seedlings take a fair amount of time to grow, so they're easy just to pull out whenever you see them. I grew up in France, where I'm originally from, in the southeastern part of France, in the Alps, close to the border with Italy and Switzerland. So I've always been used to going hiking and looking at the nature in the mountains. When I finished my studies, I got the opportunity to move to Hong Kong, and I was only supposed to stay there for a few years, but I ended up meeting my husband, Rodney, while I was there, and we ended up staying a bit more than 20 years in Hong Kong.
What happened next?
So the goal was to find a place where we would feel comfortable away from the concrete, which is why we ended up settling on Eltham, and we found this house. We needed a bit of greenery. I like that we are surrounded by trees and that the bush is not far. When we first moved into the house, the terrain here was very sloped.
Very sloped. You can see that's why you've terraced it.
Yeah, so this top area here, originally this was planned to be a play area for our daughter, but she ended up never using it. So I reclaimed the space and we built this raised bed. I have a few heirloom irises, as well as some roses, so more of the compact and smaller type. And then all around, there are some perennials like this geum.
That's not often grown, the geums, but I like them because their flowers are above the foliage.
Yeah, it's a very English cottage plant, but actually much tougher than what people think.
And then you've got little pockets of the narcissus, the daffodils.
Yes, I have the white narcissus. They love this climate.
I've spotted some things over there that I'm dying to have a little look at. This is a rather different area for your second terrace down. That's amazing what you've done here.
Yes, so this area was originally designed for my raised veggie beds, but after a few seasons of losing most of my tomato crop to rats and birds, I decided to convert it to a raised gravel bed.
That meant you could grow more plants.
Yeah, so I scooped out half of the soil, I did some gravel at the bottom for drainage, and then topped up the top half with gravel.
This gravel, just the...
Yeah, the coarse gravel.
Yep.
So that the plants really are trained to go deep to search the moisture, but the top of the plant itself stays dry, even when it's raining.
And now what are these? These are all rather special-looking plants.
Yeah, so here I have my collection of bulbs, so mostly South African bulbs. Most of them have been grown from seed. This one, for example, is a species gladiolus.
Oh, wow.
Quite different from the cultivars you find usually in our gardens.
Yeah, and that lime against the orange is just amazing colour.
Yes.
Wow.
So.
And this is another amazing. Is that another South African?
Yes, that's a Sparaxis, Sparaxis elegans. Very showy flowers.
Yeah.
Many of the South African bulbs are really, they have to flower for a very short period of time, so they need like maximum impact.
The wow effect.
Yes.
And then this is another cutie though.
Yes. I also have a few species tulips. So again, quite different from what you find usually in the gardens. They're much shorter.
Yes.
And the flowers are much more simple, but they will tend to multiply more readily in the garden.
Oh, and this one?
I have also, this is another species of gladiolus. This one is actually quite unusual because it's fragrant at night.
Oh.
And the flowers change color at night to attract insects.
Ah, moths maybe.
Yes.
This little one on the corner.
Yeah, that one also is very, very pretty, white and a dark center.
And what is it?
That's a gay sorisa, so a South African bulb as well.
Ah, you're really mad on these South African plants. Now, I spotted this little area here, which took my fancy because I love looking at little cushiony sort of plants. I think they're so cute.
Yeah, so that's my alpine trough.
Well, look at this little one. It's like a little rosette of furry sort of leaves.
So you can see all the different types of adaptation to survive in their mountain environment.
This is what really caught my eye, though.
Yeah,
those wonderful carnivorous plants.
Yeah, these are endemic to Australia, actually. The cephalotus, they grow in the southern tip of Western Australia.
Aren't they extraordinary?
And they're just, really unique plants.
So they're actually catching insects down in that little sort of pitcher bit.
Yeah, they actually attract them, catch them, then digest them and absorb the nutrients.
Yeah. And why have you got them growing in such deep pots?
So these plants are used to growing in boggy environments. So they like a lot of moisture, but I have found over the years that what is most important is actually to have a big volume of soil so that you can have some inertia in terms of the temperature of the soil. And that's more important than the level of moisture. So that's why they're planted in quite big pots.
This garden is a labour of love that showcases a multitude of beautiful and unusual plants. But even more than that, it provides a place of sanctuary as well as a vital creative outlet.
I enjoy coming in the garden, always having something to do. There's always the element of surprise, also the rhythm that it brings, the seasonality, and the fact that you can build up expectation, looking forward to things to happen. And I think for mental health and distressing, that's very important.
How's this for some inspiration to put your pedal to the gardening metal with your list of jobs for the weekend? Tony, it's coming up a treat. In cool temperate gardens, keep an eye out for black aphids infesting fresh young cherry foliage. A couple can quickly turn into a crowd, so squash, remove or spray when you see them. It's transition time for veggie seedlings started indoors. Before planting out, acclimatise them to their new surroundings by popping them outside in a sheltered spot for a week or two. Spring growth isn't just confined to the plants we love. Weeds are also going gangbusters. For pesky weeds in pavers, dousing the weeds in boiling water will see them off. Pop the kettle on. Warm temperate gardeners protect late-season brassicas from cabbage white butterfly by covering them with wildlife-friendly netting and removing eggs and caterpillars as you see them. Treat your currants and brambleberries like raspberries, blackberries and boysenberries to some aged sheep manure and compost, followed by some fresh straw mulch. Bramble on. Spring clean your compost bin. Spread finished compost around established plants or dig into veggie beds to prepare for summer crops, improving soil structure and water retention. Looking stunning in the subtropics is the sandpaper vine, Petrea volubilis, with masses of star-shaped mauve flowers drooping from tough twining vines with coarse raspy leaves. Society garlic, Tulbagia species, are right at home in the veggie or flower garden. The fine foliage and magic mauve flowers are all edible, reminiscent of chives. Hunt out the prolific cultivar John May Special. Here's another plant that's gorgeous and great to eat. The pink flower buds of the torch ginger are a common delicious ingredient in Southeast Asian cuisine. In the tropics, we are in Yawuru, season of larger, the hot time, building up to the wet. Mistletoe and billy goat plum are flowering, and the seed pods of many acacia species have split, spreading their seed before the rains. Flowering now is the scented daphne, Valeria clerodendron, a rainforest plant from northeast Queensland. This highly ornamental shrub is beautiful and the scent intoxicating. Sniff one out. Bring the outside in with a cat garden, perfect for your indoor puss. Try pet-safe plants such as catgrass, catnip and even lemongrass that your furry friend will love. Arid gardeners, if you grow kangaroo paws, why not give them a crack as a cut flower? Cut the stems about halfway up as the flowers start to open. Stick them in a vase and enjoy. Sow the seeds that make you smile. Sunflowers. Varieties like the 4-metre tall Russian giant or the shorter dwarf sensation love rich, friable soil and a bright sunny spot. Sow them direct. In the patch, go nuts and plant peanuts. Peanuts sown between sunflowers act as a living mulch, suppress weeds, retain moisture, and give you a good snack in a few months. Welcome to October, gardeners. A top month to get stuck in and go flat out. Head over to our Gardening Australia social pages and let us know what projects you tick off the list this weekend. Well, that's all we could squeeze in this week, but there'll be plenty in bloom for you next time. Take a look.
We all love flowers. They're great for us, but they're also great for all those wild visitors who come to our gardens. And I'm going to show you how you can serve a buffet of blooms all year long.
Have you ever imagined what you'd grow if you lived in a tropical rainforest? I'm visiting a gardener in far north Queensland who's growing the garden of your dreams.
Crowding in quite a few plants keeps the garden low maintenance.
This is low maintenance.
And we meet a plant breeder creating the most stunning flowers you've ever seen.
One that I've recently registered called Lavender Diamonds. It's got a lovely lavender colour with white spots all the way around the edges, so it's quite striking.